Welcome to Keepers of the Word. We're an esoteric study group of Freemasons. Our purpose is to share knowledge of mystery schools and debunk any misconceptions about Freemasonry. You're here with Mike and Ron.
How's it going, guys? And we're here with author Jaime Paul Lamb, author of Myth, Magic, and Masonry. How you doing, Jaime?
I'm doing great. How are you guys doing?
Excellent.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for asking me.
Thanks for joining us. So my first question, I'll go ahead and get it started, is what was your motivation to write the book, Myth, Magic, and Masonry?
You know what happened was after I was raised about 10 years ago, I started to unpack what had gone on during the degrees, you know, and I was reading a lot of different sources and trying to get my head around some of the less than superficial interpretations of our work, you know, our symbolism and our allegory and our ritual, you know, and I really wanted to kind of, because I understood that, yeah, there's this kind of moral and ethical interpretation, right? And it's given to us very plainly, like right in the ritual, you know, rectitude of conduct and the working tools and, you know, uprightness and circumscribing your passions and staying within due bounds, etc. All of the moral and ethical interpretations are right there, you know, at the surface and given clearly to us. But it seemed to me that there was quite a bit more that was kind of just beneath the surface and then very far beneath the surface, you know. So it seemed like an excavation kind of job. So what caused me to write the book was, over the course of those years, I had, because the book, Myth, Magic, and Masonry is really, it kind of comes from 4 essays that I wrote individually, you know, and then I expanded on them, and then I tied them all together with the Anna Lucas. So if you'll notice, my thesis in that book, the one kind of thread that winds through everything, and hence that's why the cover has the bull with the zodiacal wheel on it, is because if you wind back to 4000 BCE, you know, that's my perspective. That's my interpretive vantage point throughout the entire thing, you know. Anyway, so that's what tied those 4 individual pieces together. The first one being on ceremonial magic, the second one being on solar and astrological symbolism, the third one being on mythology, classical mythology, and then the fourth one being on mystery traditions, but specifically Mithraism as the exemplar of the mysteries. So
Awesome.
That's what kind of got me writing, was trying to understand those deeper levels, you know, for myself.
Right. So, you know, going back to those points are kind of considered occult, right? So
Right.
in the craft or in Masonry, why do you feel that word is looked at like an occult?
I think because I'm turning up my volume a bit. I think because you know, some of it I think is just an etymological thing. It's got the word cult in it, cult, you know, and I think people, unless you're really interested in esoterica or you read about the Western esoteric tradition and things like that, I mean, you might hear a cult, and since like I grew up, I did my high school years in the 80s, right? And I imagine some of you guys did as well. So you remember how there was the big scare, like, you know, satanic rock and roll music and stuff like that?
Satanic Panic.
The Satanic Panic, right.
Yeah.
So all that sort of puritanical Nancy Reaganisms about the whole thing, and the PRMC and Tipper Gore and all that was happening around that time. I think that just touched the popular consciousness in a lot of ways, to where if you see a cult, or if you see even a Baphomet, which I don't think is anything Luciferian or satanic about that, right? All of a sudden, you know, that's immediately, you know, you're tied in with Satanism and a cult, not a cult, you know? So I just think there's some, you know, what do you call it when a word sounds like another word and it kind of gives you that impression? I forget. There's a word for that, but
I think
Alliteration.
yeah, you conflate. Yeah. You might be right. Alliteration. Yeah.
I think so.
in our degrees or in our
So you touched on those four lenses that you write about in your book. Can you give us like a little example of each one of those four different lenses and the relationship to Masonry?
Yeah. So in the first section is ceremonial magic, and in the ceremonial magic section, one of the things I get into, probably not my most powerful argument in that section, but one of the things I get into is the volume of sacred law as a grimoire, and how we use invocations and we use like the King James Bible is used in our ritual. In English-speaking lodges, we use that, right? So if you're taking biblical passages and creating extra biblical narratives, like our Hermetic legend, and you're using those in a magical way, you're using those in an initiatory way, and you're using those in a way that uses your imagination in conjunction with the expression of your will or yourself, then I view that, and we do a straight up invocation before we undertake any of the work. So there are several, I'm just picking two. There are dozens of them that I picked out in that section. But so for ceremonial magic, those would be a couple of things that I isolated and put in their classically magical context, and then the next section was solar and astrological symbolism. Again, you could take, and in that section, I really built off of a lot of Robert Hewitt Brown stuff. That's like the starting point for the astrotheological perspective in Masonry. You guys ever read Stellar Theology and Masonic Astronomy?
No, I haven't.
No.
That's a tremendous book. So that's in 1882, Robert Hewitt Brown wrote Stellar Theology and Masonic Astronomy. And it was in that he made the case for, his biggie was making the case for, his big thesis was interpreting the Hermetic legend as an annual solar circuit. So, yeah, and he does a very compelling job of that. So in that section, I recap some of the big Robert Hewitt Brown stuff, some of the Pike stuff where he messed around with astrotheology, solar and astrological symbolism. I kind of pick up where they left off, and I put my own findings on that and kind of, spruce it up, condense it, and put that so everybody gets, because I wanted everybody to, I wanted to kind of have a fully realized view of that particular perspective, which is a valuable perspective when you look at our work and our symbols and our allegory. The astrological or astronomical and that sort of solar allegory is a valuable tool, a valuable lens. The next section was classical mythology. So in that section, I basically go through and I isolate a lot of the components of our ritual, our paraphernalia, our regalia, and some of the stuff like wisdom, strength, and beauty, the three principal supports. They correspond to, wisdom would be the Ionic column, which is sacred to Athena, and that's in Vitruvius. It was used in houses of learning like libraries and stuff, academies and things. Strength would be the Doric order, and that's sacred to Mars or Ares, and that's used in more militaristic settings. because it denotes strength. And I think Vitruvius even said it's of the body of a vigorous man, or something like that. He said when he was describing the Doric column that it was very martial in its nature. And then lastly, beauty. The Corinthian column, sacred to Aphrodite or Venus, if Greek or Roman, and how due to the acanthus leaves and that capital in particular, Callimachus, I believe, is the one who first came up with that capital, and it is said that he found he designed the Corinthian capital after finding a votive basket for a young maiden, a beautiful young maiden who had just died. He saw her votive basket, and it had been sitting there a while, so the acanthus leaves had grown through the basket and kind of pushed up against the rock that was on top of it. And due to the formation of the leaves, he thought it was very beautiful, and he went and he carved the first, the legend goes, he carved the first Corinthian capital. So, and there's other things with our jewels and our, like I'm a lodge organist most of the time. Right now I'm a junior warden, but for most of my Masonic career, I've been a lodge organist, and the jewel of the organist is the lyre. You ever see it? And, that has a direct mythological correspondence. It was gifted to Apollo from Hermes. So Hermes created the lyre, gave it to Apollo because he had stolen some cattle from him. Hermes the thief, in his one of his trickster kind of thief forms, had stolen some of Apollo's cattle. He was found guilty, and he had to give up some. In recompense, he gave up. He created the lyre for Apollo. Apollo didn't really get into playing it, so it just kind of sat there. And then he ended up giving it to Orpheus. And you know the story of Orpheus going down into Hades and charming. He was able to go into the underworld, whereas really only Hermes was able to psychopompically descend into the underworld. But Orpheus, due to the pleasing tones of his lyre, was able to descend into the underworld to fetch Eurydice. His
music soothing the savage beast.
Exactly. So Cerberus, the three-headed dog, and Charon, the oarsman on the river Styx, he was able to get past them. Oh, and lastly, the last section, because you said each section.
Right.
I did ceremonial magic, solar and astrological symbolism, classical mythology. Oh, and then Mithraism. So basically, I go through all of Mithraism, from Cumont and a lot of the standard sources, and I compile, the basic story of what went on, how it was. Mithras was, kind of a lesser known among the Zoroastrian pantheon of deities, and that he was taken on by the Roman legionaries around the turn of the Common Era, and he was the preferred religion of the Roman legionaries. And there's a lot of things in Mithraism that correspond to Masonry. Now, I should do a disclaimer here real quick, is I'm not, and I'm not arguing this in the book, nor am I arguing it now, for an unbroken transmission of Mithraism into Freemasonry. I don't believe that, that it was, that there's been a transmission that's made, Mackey makes an argument for it. DaCosta makes an argument for it. So if you believe them, they're pretty good Masonic authorities. They get a little fantastic, but so does Anderson and everybody else, right? But what I do say is that there are a lot of similarities in Mithraism, such as they were called syndexioi. brothers of the grip, because they shared a certain grip. There was a grade system. They had communal feasts. There was you did a certain grip with the pater of the lodge. The pater is like the worshipful master. I picked out several things that are very similar in our degree work that happened in the Mithraic initiatory cycle.
In the
Awesome.
degree work, did you feel that there was specific ceremonial magic going on that you were like, well, this is something that it belongs somewhere else?
In our degree work or in Mithraism?
Ours.
In our degree work, I wouldn't say that it's baked in per se. I wouldn't say that it's necessarily. Now here's what I would say. There is a hermetic magic about our work that I've found. And here's what I mean. The simplest example would be the celestial sphere and the terrestrial sphere. So you have a relationship between the microcosm and the macrocosm that happens, but that is, sort of symbolized by those two spheres. And I think that's what sort of informs Freemasonry, along with the theurgical intercession, when we invoke this deity to intercede in our affairs and things. That's classically sort of a theurgical operation, right? There's also, in that Hermetic outlook, how about this? Here's a good way to explain it. The difference between astrology and astronomy is that both of them measure and calculate and chronicle the movement of celestial bodies. But astrology comes with the accompanying Hermetic belief that those movements have a microcosmic effect on man. Chemistry and alchemy both measure and sort of measure and demarcate the transformation of elements, right? But alchemy, as opposed to just straight up chemistry, comes with the accompanying Hermetic belief that these operations that happen in the retort or in the crucible or in the tincture, have a corresponding Hermetic effect on the microcosm, man. And then the same, I would say, with operative and speculative Freemasonry. Both of them use the tools of stonemasonry. They use the vernacular of stonemasonry. They use geometry, and they use the basic shell of the system. But Freemasonry Freemasonry is Hermetic in the sense that it comes with the accompanying belief that these operations with the working tools and this extra biblical ritual that we do has an effect on the microcosm, man, and that all the astronomical things that we do, such as circumambulation, you can get into, if you get into appendant bodies, there's things like the Royal Arch and the Four Banners, and we're constantly drawing down a Hermetic resonance with vis-a-vis cosmic sympathies. So I make an argument for that sort of operation magically.
Awesome. So do you think, going back to the four lenses, do you think any particular one of those four plays a major role in Masonry, or do you think they all work together as far as the relationship?
I would think that they're pretty distinct, and what I did to kind of turn them all into one, 4 chapters in one book, was, like I said, uniting them via the thread of the Analucas. So to get the perspective to unlock those 4 different interpretive vantage points, you'd have to reorient yourself to the Analucus, 4000 BCE. And from that temporal vantage point, certain things in our symbol sets and in our ritual are unlocked differently than they are from, say, a Piscean precessional perspective or an Aryan precessional perspective. You know what I mean? So there's without getting too much into it, there are precessional ages that are 2,160 years each. And that's when the sun occurs in one sign of the zodiac at the vernal equinox. It rises in one sign for 2,160 years. And there's been several of those. The commencement of the Taurian age would have been in the vicinity of 4000 BCE. So that's why I use that Taurian age perspective to look at those four subjects, which are united by that perspective. Look at the Tauroctony, look at the tetramorph that we were briefly chatting about before we went live here. There's just a lot to bite off from that perspective.
Going into the tetramorph, in Christianity, it's looked at as Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Going back to the Sumerians, that was their celestial hierarchy. How do you feel all of that is connected?
I like that you brought up the Sumerians because they were the first ones, and I'll get to how I think they're connected, is they were the first ones to demarcate the 360 degrees of the circle. So they looked at the ecliptic, and because of an annual solar year, they figured to be in the vicinity of 360 days. That's where we get the 360 degree circle. So everything that we think of spatially and temporally, and this is, I think, super important, not only in Freemasonry, but in understanding Western, any civilization. So the Sumerians, as we know, are, likely the first civilization that in the historic period, let's say, the first civilization. And that means animal husbandry, agriculture, art expression, and things like that, megalithic structures and things. So they demarcated that 360 degree circle because of an annual solar circuit, right? And in doing so, they created the means by which we communicate amongst each other, anything spatially or temporally. So that's called the Sexagesimal System. It's the base 60 system that's based on that. That's where it comes from. So that means when we talk about the fourth part of a circle, that means when we talk about a square, when we talk about a plumb, when we talk about a level, when we talk about 180 degrees, when we talk about 90, 45, whatever degrees. So our spatial orientation, X, Y, and Z coordinates in the Cartesian system, we are always talking about, we quantify that spatial stuff by that 360 degree circle. That's where those degrees come from. And similarly, when we're talking about time, anything temporal, when we're talking about 72 days, when we're talking about 30 days, when we're talking about 60 seconds, when we're talking about 365 days or 12 months or an hour or 24 hours, we're always talking about something that comes from that sexagesimal system, the base 60, 360 degree circle, that system that the Sumerians had 6,000 years ago. And it's important that they had it 6,000 years ago because 6,000 years ago was 4,000 BCE. So I make that point in the book as well. That circle and the Sumerians, and I'm getting back into the tetramorph. I'm sorry, I kind of spun out in this thing.
Yeah, this is a good basis for it. So
yeah, so that circle is of immense importance for everything spatial and everything temporal that we know, because everything else is decimal, right? Everything else is 10, base 10. You know, when we're talking about integers, how many apples do you have in your basket, Susie? We're talking about 7, 3, whatever. Who knows? I mean, we're talking about integers, and we kind of get that idea because of our hands, right? Base 10. But again, when we're talking about space and time, we're always talking about the Sumerians and their 360-degree circle. That's where that comes from. So in their dividing of that circle, and I think that's like $1 million information as culturally, as far as I'm concerned. You know what I mean? That digesting the gravity of that was massive for me. Thinking, oh my God, all right, these guys had this 6,000 years ago, and we haven't improved on it really an iota since then. You know? So anyway, yeah, and they had, I don't know if it was the Sumerians, it might have been the Akkadians or the Assyrians. It was one of the, because it goes Sumerians, Akkadians, Assyrians, Babylonians, Neo-Babylonians, then the Persians in that area. Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. So one of those cultures, an early one, probably the Akkadians, came up with what were called the Lamassu. And the Lamassu, in case you haven't heard, were sphinxes. And these sphinxes had, they guarded they were one on either side of the portals of the ziggurats. And their ziggurats, you know, some of them, such as the one at Borsippa, had 7 levels that were definitely planetary, like no doubt about it. They even colored them as such, and they attributed them to their planetary gods. So it was the 7 visible planets on the ziggurat, and the doorways to their ziggurats were generally guarded by the Lamassu. And these Lamassu were sphinxes that consisted of the wings of an eagle, the head of a man, the body of a lion, and the legs of a bull. And sometimes you transpose those last two, the body of a bull and the legs or feet of a lion. But it was always those 4 fixed signs. What we say astrologically, you would say the fixed signs of the zodiac. That would be Taurus in the vernal equinox, Leo at the summer solstice, Scorpio, anciently conflated with the eagle because of Aquila, probably. Most people think that's why. Aquila is a constellation in the vicinity. And then down to Aquarius, the man, at the winter solstice. So that's where we get the first appearance, on record at least, of the tetramorph, or the 4 living creatures, is from the Mesopotamian cultures. And then, of course, you know, you see it later in various forms, various permutations.
In the tetramorph, you're seeing that morph from going from Sumeria, Syria to Egypt, and then into Christianity. When it gets to Christianity, it's completely changed into something else. Do you have any idea as to why Christianity adopted the tetramorph?
I think because it was in some of the books. It's in Ezekiel. I'm not sure. I'm not a biblical scholar, so I'm only taking shots in the dark in terms of which books preceded other books. But I would say that we know that Ezekiel's vision, he encounters the tetramorph, or the 4, and then in John of Patmos, of course. So that's New Testament, Revelation, John of Patmos. So that would be around the turn of the Common Era, and I think didn't Enoch encounter a tetramorph as well?
I believe so.
Yeah. So
well, 4 is also a very important number Kabbalistically as well. I mean, 4 represents the physical plane. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we've seen 4 with Hesed, the Sephirah Hesed, Jupiter. And also Kabbalistically 4 for Daleth, the door. and the physical plane, because like in tarot, Daleth is associated with the Empress, and through that we get all that fertility and fecundity of, and that material kind of pleasure that goes along with that Venerian archetype. And the number 4 rests on that Kabbalistically as well, because of Daleth and that door to the material world.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you feel that there's symbolism that has been overlooked in the craft, where you're looking at one thing and you're saying, hey, you know what, that's not that. Why are we passing it off as that?
Symbolism that's been I think that one that's pretty obvious, we talk about the point within a circle. It comes up a lot. Yeah. And I think it's pretty clear that it is that the 2 lines are solstitial, right? Because you've got St. John the Baptist for the summer solstice. You got St. John the Evangelist for the winter solstice. There's been an argument made, though, that, they couldn't be solstitial because otherwise they would be like this. But that's from the perspective, they would be like this. They would, just like they are on a globe. When you're looking at a globe, you get the 2 tropics with the equator in between them, and sometimes you'll see that sine wave. That's the path of the sun, going from the vernal equinox up to the summer solstice, and then down to the winter solstice, and then back up to the vernal equinox. But I don't know. I see a lot in the point within a circle. There's diagram. There's Thales' theorem, isn't there? You ever work on Thales' theorem, which is how you will always create a right angle if you bisect the point in that circle. You just draw a line anywhere straight across. And that's points A and B, let's say, on the perimeter of that circle. And you've got a line that goes through the point in the center. Any other point that is not A or B, any point C on the perimeter of that circle will form a right angle, a 90-degree angle in relationship to A and B. So point C will always be a right angle to A and B, wherever you put it on there. And that's Thales' theorem. I was going to finish the thing about the solstitial point within a circle. So, yeah, I've heard people argue they would be horizontal if they were, because they would be lines of latitude, if they would be the tropics, right? And the argument is no, because they put the volume of sacred law in the east. So the orientation, look at even the word, orientation. To orient oneself is to face east, the orient, right? So they put the Bible or the volume of sacred law at the top as if to denote that's the east. So instead of our north-centric normal orientation in modern cartography, right? When you're looking at any map or any chart or anything, you're always thinking north is going to be up here, right? Because that's just the way we're brought up to think about it. And I'm pretty sure in the ancient world that was not the case. The east was the orient. That's where you oriented yourself. So that's what.
I've also heard Robert Lomas and Christopher Knight wrote a book, and their argument for those pillars is that the reason why they're solstitial is because those are the equal days. And if you're trying to set a calendrical system to know what day of the year it is, those 2 points in the, even if you use those 2 staffs as equal points from distance from each other in the ground facing upward, then you're going to be able to build a circle around that to be able to create a calendar to know what's happening. And their argument was that that came from the time after the Great Flood, when people didn't know what day, whatever, and if they had to be able to develop culture again and do husbandry and grow crops and all that kind of stuff. That's their argument for it, which is interesting.
I like that argument, and I write a little bit about that in Myth, Magic, and Masonry, about the gnomons, they're called. So you would raise a gnomon or two gnomons. Here's a place where you see them. We were at Karnak. We went to Egypt a few years ago, 3-4 years ago, and Karnak Temple, only one of the obelisks is still there, but a lot of those temples would have had two obelisks right before the pylons, right? Two non-load-bearing pillars, two non-load-bearing obelisks, and the obelisks have a point on them, so they're a perfect, what you call gnomon, which would be the point of a sundial, because when you see that, the gnomon is that erect part of a sundial. And obelisks are particularly good at that because they're pointed at the top, and they trace their shadow very accurately, because of that point. So they would erect these two non-load-bearing gnomons, and at the winter solstice, one casts a shadow this far north, right? And at the summer solstice, it casts a shadow this far south. And the point at which they cross, you can deduce true north, because you're getting the point at which they cross. And then once you were able to get true north, then you called in I wish I could remember their name. They were called the Harpatanate or something like that. Harpatane. They were the rope stretchers in Egyptian society. So these rope stretchers demarcated the land. They used geometry, and they used specifically the Pythagorean theorem to demarcate the land and to square off things. So after you had gotten that solstitial point and were able to find true north, you would call in the rope stretchers, who had their ropes with some Pythagorean triplet, whether it was 3, 4, 5, or 16, 9, 16, 25, or whatever Pythagorean triplet they used in knots. They would take your point and then square your temple. So if you put a stake in the ground right at that point, you can lay out your base, your vertical, and your hypotenuse, and that will give you a right angle. So once you got true north, that's how you got your right angle, and then you can continue making the structure. So I think I've read that also before, that Robert Lomax, is it Lomax or Lomas?
Lomas. Christopher
Lomas.
Knight and Robert Lomas, yeah.
Yeah.
Uriel's Machine, that's a good book. Really good book.
I've read the Hiram Key. They did Hiram Key, right?
Yeah, that was good as well. No.
Yeah, that's the one I read. But
I have a question from James. James wanted to ask, what Masonic traditions or Masonic workings are directly connected to magic?
What Masonic traditions, as in what pre and post, like what appendant bodies and tributaries and distributaries from Masonry have been?
What he's saying is, I think what he's saying is there anything that you find in our ritual or what we're doing related to any magic mystery school?
Maybe starting with the fact that we use the word ritual.
Well, there's certainly that. There's fumigation. Some lodges, particularly of the observant variety, will sometimes have a thuriber. We have one at my observant lodge here, a lodge we chartered a couple of years ago. We have a thuriber who essentially does a banishing ritual and fumigates the space before we open. So there's also tiling as a form of banishing as well. It's very, that could be considered very Kabbalistic in terms of a flaming sword and everything that kind of denotes. There's, of course, the Solomonic ideas of, because there's a very rich history of King Solomon as a magician, and in the grimoire tradition. You've got the Testament of Solomon, you've got the Greater and Lesser Keys of Solomon. So there's certainly a lot of, King Solomon was no stranger to magic, and that's scriptural, that's documented stuff. There's also, in the Arabian Nights, there are stories of Suleiman. He's called Suleiman in that, commanding 72 jinn, just as there are in the Quran as well. In fact, there's a great story about. That is it's the jinn and the fisherman in the Arabian Nights. But the whole bit with the brass pot and the pantacles and the essentially the whole the seals of Solomon. And
in your
everything.
book you talk about the seals, right? You talk about the goetic demons, and in relation to what your book is talking about. And can you get into that a bit?
I talk a little bit about the Shem HaMephorash, which are the 72 jinn. Yeah. So again, now I'm going to go back again, because we're talking about that 360-degree circle, and we're talking about the Analucus again, because 72, if you divide that circle, so the Egyptians made an innovation on that Sumerian 360-degree circle, and that was coming up with what they called the decans. So if you look at the Dendera zodiac, you'll see that there are 36 decans on there around the perimeter of the Dendera zodiac. These 36 decans were essentially, they were two things in Egypt. They were for telling time, because on the eastern horizon, the various decans would come up, and they were each a 10 degrees of that 360-degree circle. So they could tell time by that, diurnally, right? Diurnally and annually. So the 72 jinn and the Shem HaMephorash, the goetic demons, are what you call the quinences. So you've got the decans, right, which are, as the name sounds, they're 10-degree segments there's 36 of them, and they're 10-degree arc segments of that 360-degree circle.
Right.
The quinences are half of that. There's two quinences per decan, and they're 5-degree arc segments of that, and there happens to be 72 of those. And those 72 quinences correspond to the Shem HaMephorash, and they're each associated with a certain vice or a certain virtue, and there's a certain sigil associated with each one, and they can be invoked, they can be banished, they can be used for various operations per the Ars Goetia, which is one of the books in the Claviculi Solomonus. Yeah. And it's funny how a lot of this stuff has an astrological kind of base. And look at all those grimoires, particularly the Arabic ones like the Picatrix. It's all astrology. At its base, it's all astrology, and that Egyptian idea, which was another thing I was going to say about these decans, right, that the Egyptians came up with, their innovation on the Sumerian cosmological model, is that they ensouled or inspirited their statuary by isolating that by concentrating and isolating that astral influence. So they believed in bringing down cosmic sympathies in a Hermetic way. Hermes Trismegistus, an Egyptian, right? Ptolemaic Egyptian, or Hellenistic Egyptian, but Egyptian nonetheless. And that was the idea that was very Egyptian about that that sort of Hellenistic period as well, is that they could concentrate, focus, and bring down those celestial or particularly astral influences into their statuary. And they did this by means of astral magic, which feeds into the grimoire tradition and feeds into the Solomonic literature and feeds in via Hermeticism into Freemasonry.
Interesting. Was there anything that you felt you had to leave out of your book, or maybe there wasn't enough room? Is it something that you wanted to talk about later? Or is that
well, I mean, there were some things that really came up after the fact, where after it was done and I sent off the manuscript, I was like, well, there's never a stopping point.
Right.
I mean, the stopping point is when you send it off to the publisher, right. and when they're done with their editing. Because I could have gone in and kept hitting up that manuscript and changed stuff every time I went in. And same thing with the last book. I have another one coming out June 24th this summer. And it's going to be about 400 pages. I mean, it's almost 140,000 words. So that's a lot, right? It's going to be a fat book. And that's another one where every time I would hit up that manuscript, I can go in there and I could change stuff every single time I go in, walk away and say, that's perfect. But then I'll go in a day later, 5 days later, a week later, and yeah. Well,
what's this new book about, if you don't mind talking about it?
Yeah. So the new book is called Approaching the Middle Chamber. And then the subtitle is The 7 Liberal Arts in Freemasonry and the Western Esoteric Tradition. So just like what it says, I use the Fellowcraft lecture as a model, as sort of the template for the layout of the book. And I have an introduction. Pierce Vaughn did the foreword to it. There's an introduction, and then it goes all the way through that lecture as the sort of skeleton of the work, from the porch of the temple all the way through to the middle chamber, and hitting every single thing in that lecture and expounding on that from the perspective of Western esotericism. So I get into the, I get into the pillars very deeply and talk about a lot of this stuff we've been talking about. I get into the 3 principal officers, the 3 principal supports of the lodge. There's a great section. I get into the empirical senses, the 5 senses, and what these mean in an esoteric context, what they mean classically in various occult contexts. And then I get into the meat of the book is, of course, the trivium and the quadrivium, which I minutely dissect, and then really feed in. So it's not going to be like that, that book, the Trivium that everybody has, that little hard brown, the Quadrivium. Sorry, that little hard brown book that you've seen. Anyway, there's a popular book called the Quadrivium. I forget is it Taskin who put it out? I forget who put it out, but it's more of a general kind of thing for your layperson. I keep my work very very much in the Western esoteric kind of perspective, because of course if you're getting into the trivium and the quadrivium, you could approach that from so many different cultural angles and so many different kind of flavors of that, just looking at the material, that you have to kind of pick your audience,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you said you've been a Mason for over 10 years. Have you seen a shift in Masonry, and what do you think's in store for the future of Masonry, especially esoterically speaking?
So I have seen that because I came up in a very solid Blue Lodge back east in Norwalk, Connecticut, Oldwell St. John's number 6. And it was a very old lodge, chartered 1765. So older than the United States of America.
Yeah.
And a very old established lodge who did very solid work, great memory work. I had to meet full proficiency. It was, but I wouldn't call it an esoteric lodge, other than not in the way that we tend to talk about that today, the way we tend to use that term today. Of course, because it's Masonic, there's some inherent esotericism there, because all you got to do is look in the dictionary at the word esoteric, and you know that fits Masonry, whether we're talking about Eliphas Levi or Albert Pike or not. You know, if we're talking about Preston and Anderson, you're still saying it's esoteric because it's esoteric. You know, it's for the initiated. It's for the, which, precluding the profane means that your thing is esoteric. So, yes, I have seen a change over this amount of time, and that change has been that more people are willing to talk about esoterica. More people are, I guess, knowledgeable about it, or have, and I'm not sure how much of this comes with the internet as well, that the internet has played a role in us being, having access to this sort. And, if you're on Facebook, you know that there are a bazillion, or at least several, esoteric Mason groups,
Yeah.
So, I'm not sure what's causing the change, but I will say this: there is a little bit of a pushback, and I'm glad that there is. There should always be. We should always keep it on the rails. That we should always balance that sort of those two poles, and not let it get too, I guess, speculative or too way out there. We need to be responsible in our research. I think that's a big point that's coming up, is like we need to cite credible sources. We need to be careful about promoting what's the way to say it? We need to be responsible with the material, and we need to be careful about passing on an intact edifice. And we need to be mindful that we're not contributing to the cycle of bad information.
Yeah, disinformation. Yeah,
right.
There's a lot of misinformation out there, and that's one of the reasons why we decided to create this group, is because there is a lot of misinformation. There is a lot of false, and just BS out there that's talking about what we actually do when it's really not that.
Yeah.
So it's good to have folks like yourself write books and correlate the two and really talk about why, how, when, where, and then you're able to go back into history and cite things, and now we have credibility, and we're able to point at things and say, okay, this is where this came from, and this is why. And I think that's, I'm honored to have brothers like you in the craft with me, because you're folks that I learned from. These are people that I learned from. So a big thank you, and I look forward to the rest of your work.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I mean, this has been a pleasure, and I'm always down to talk about my work, and hopefully when things get back to normal, I'd love to come and visit. I know that I was talking to Joseph Newman about coming out to Pedro a couple of years ago. Right around the time I came out to South Pasadena last time. I don't know if I ever saw you guys out there. I lived out there a couple of years and used to go to. That was my affiliate lodge, South Pasadena. So we probably ran into each other. Yeah. I was out there with Dago and Marco and Julio and all those guys.
Good guys.
Good guys.
Yeah. They've done a lot of work and have paved a good path for folks to go down. To talk about subjects like this.
Yeah.
And
oh yeah, their Illumination series and things like that.
that's excellent. Yeah.
And Fauché, Culver City. They're Merrick and those cats.
Yep.
Really great brothers, and it's you know, you got a lot of good Freemasonry there in Los Angeles and thereabouts.
So we started our own series called the Mystic Lantern Lecture Series.
Wow.
And now, you know, we also do Esotericon. So we hope to have you at both, if possible, in the near future when things cool down and, you know, we're able to talk to each other face to face.
Yeah.
We would love to have you for both. That would be great.
Please, you know, hit me up anytime. And my information it's in the back of my book. So.
Where can people buy your book? How about that? Where can people buy your book?
Yeah.
Where can people get a hold of you?
There's the information. There's that old picture of me. but the information's on the last page where you can. That's my email and everything. But you can buy the book at the best place to buy it is at thelaudablepursuit.com. That's the publisher.
Okay.
Because that way Jeff Bezos doesn't take a bite out of it. But you can always go to Amazon and buy it as well. If you got Amazon Prime and you just want to get it that way, you can do that too.
Laudable Pursuit is the preferred method, and we'll make sure that we put that up there for you. I'll have Joe. We'll see if Joe can make that happen. So that
cool.
way our viewers can go ahead and purchase your book and support you.
Yeah. Well, I want to come out, so let me know about it.
Remind us one more time what the name of your new book is and when it's coming out.
It's coming out it's Wednesday, June 24th, 2020. And it's called Approaching the Middle Chamber, the 7 Liberal Arts in Freemasonry and the Western Esoteric Tradition. Let me tell you something magical, though, about it.
Okay.
So Wednesday, I'm big on drawing down planetary influences. If you're friends with me on Facebook, you probably know that because every day I do a planetary-based kind of post, you know, where I'll do the tarot. I'm a huge astrology nut too, so I'll do the tarot and the astrology for that corresponding to that day, and I'll bring in classical mythological elements and stuff like that because I believe in what's called Ficino called them chains. Sometimes they're called sunthemata, and these are signatures. You know, they're basically planetary, zodiacal, elemental, astrological signatures that we use in magic, and we bring these down. So it's just like the metals correspond to certain days of the week, and it's that idea, right? This hermetic corresponding idea. Anyway, so if you look at the date of my book release, it's Wednesday, June 24th. So there's 2 things. Wednesday is Wednas, which is the Germanic subsumation or synchronization of Hermes, Mercury. So I wanted that Hermetic element, right? So I wanted it to be a Wednesday. And then June 24th, as you probably know, is St. John the Baptist Day. Yeah, in the vicinity of the solstice and right smack on St. John the Baptist Day, so one of the Saints Johns. And so I definitely wanted to, I'm a firm believer in capitalizing on those cosmic sympathies that we've been talking about.
Manifesting energy right there, brother.
Yeah, exactly.
So pretty much Google Jaime Paul Lamb, and you're going to find how to give this book. We'll put it up there so that way we have all the information for you. I want to say thank you very much, Jaime. I want to say thank you to my production team. I know we're doing this a little unorthodox, but hey, it's working, so it is what it is. And everybody that's watching, thank you very much for supporting. Stay safe. Thank you. And do you have anything else you want to add, Jaime?
You know, just again, thanks, brethren, for having me out. Thanks, everybody, for watching. And I hope to see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Be safe. And, let's get things back on the rails once the coast is clear and start doing some more conferences and esotericons and stuff like that.
Definitely. We look forward to having you. Okay, so that's all we have, folks. Thank you for tuning in.